Sometimes I hate being right. I hate making a prediction that ends up coming true, even though I don't want it to come true. Not long ago, I made a video talking about Pixar's newest movie, Inside Out 2, and my thoughts on it. The general consensus that I had was that it was not a bad movie at all. It was far from a terrible movie. It was decent. It was cute. It had its moments, but it just didn't feel very special. It wasn't really a bad movie. It was more just kind of an unnecessary movie. Like, Inside Out just worked a lot better as just a one-time standalone movie. There were ideas here and there for a sequel, but I don't know if there were enough ideas to help justify the existence of an Inside Out sequel. And the main problem that I had with this movie was it was just kind of the same thing as the first film, which, again, to be fair, I don't know how else you can make a sequel to Inside Out, but still, it's not as creative or unique as the first movie. It doesn't feel as fresh as the first movie. I don't know what it is, but there's just something missing from this movie. I don't know how I could be able to elaborate on this. But the quality of this movie does not matter. What I personally thought of the movie does not matter when it comes to what we're going to be talking about today. In my initial review, I made a prediction claiming that this movie would inevitably become a massive box office success for Pixar, their first in half a decade. And I went over why this was a bad thing actually, why we should be concerned by this, which I'll go over in a little bit. Lo and behold though, I would end up being correct. This movie has been a massive success at the box office. As a matter of fact, it hasn't even been 2 weeks since this movie came out, and it is already the highest grossing movie of 2024. Jesus. Now here's the reason as to why this concerns me. Back in the 2000s, during Pixar's golden age, they would just put out nothing but original movies and that's it. Every single movie they put out in the 2000s, between Monsters Inc. in 2001 and Up in 2009, they were original. They were completely unique ideas, unique storylines. And then in the 2010s, they started to rely a lot more on sequels to their already existing movies. Pixar put out 11 movies in the 2010s, and of these movies, only 4 of them were original. And then going further into that, of these 4 original movies, only 2 of them were particularly great. I have never seen Brave. It is the only Pixar movie that I've yet to watch actually, but from what I've heard, it's one of their lesser quality movies, so something tells me I'm not really missing out on much. And then The Good Dinosaur is just really mediocre, generic, and forgettable. I don't want to be too harsh on this movie because it did go through development hell, but it's not one of Pixar's finer movies. I think we can all agree on that. The fact that this movie did horrible at the box office and was Pixar's first box office flop was very surprising and very shocking at the time, but in retrospect, it's not really that surprising given how generic and mediocre the movie is. After the release of Toy Story 4 in 2019, Pixar announced that they were going to start focusing on original storylines throughout the 2020s. They were going to rely less on sequels. So let's go over how that turned out for them. Starting off, you have Toy Story 4, which is a sequel, obviously. It came out in 2019, and prior to Inside Out 2, it was the last successful movie they had at the box office. Every single movie that Pixar would put out between Toy Story 4 and Inside Out 2, they're original movies. The only exception to this is Lightyear, which is a spin-off of Toy Story. For the sake of making things easier though, I'm going to classify Lightyear as an original movie. It barely has anything to do with Toy Story besides having Buzz Lightyear and Zurg in it, so it's technically not wrong for me to call it an original film. I don't care what any of you say. So let's see how these 6 original movies turned out for Pixar. Starting off, you had Onward in 2020, which would end up becoming a box office flop. However, this wasn't due to the movie being bad or anything like that, but rather it was due to when the movie came out. This movie came out shortly before the pandemic became a worldwide problem, and as a result of that, its theatrical release was cut short, which would subsequently cause the movie to flop at the box office. The next three Pixar movies, Soul from 2020, Luca from 2021, and Turning Red from 2022, they would all be released straight to Disney+. None of them would be released to theaters due to the pandemic. Following that, in the summer of 2022, you had Lightyear, the first theatrically released Pixar movie since Toy Story 4. Again, this technically isn't an original movie, but I'm going to classify it as one just to make this easier, and also because the movie has almost nothing to do with Toy Story at all. Even though this was the first theatrically released Pixar movie, and even though it is part of Pixar's flagship franchise, Toy Story, the movie ended up flopping at the box office for a multitude of reasons. After that, you had Elemental in 2023, another original movie, which at first was a box office flop. However, slowly but surely it would go on to become something of a minor box office success. I don't know. I don't want to go over the whole debate of whether Elemental was a box office flop or a box office success, so I'm just gonna say that even though it kind of was a success, it wasn't a huge success for Pixar when compared to some of their previous movies, and especially when compared to their next movie after Elemental. One of the biggest reasons as to why Lightyear and Elemental flopped despite being theatrically released was because by that point people were accustomed to watching Pixar movies on Disney+. As a result of these three movies not getting theatrical releases, people didn't see any reason to watch Elemental in theaters when they could instead just wait until it comes out on Disney Plus to watch it. There are of course other factors as to why these movies didn't do that well, such as the fact that Lightyear was extremely generic and forgettable, and Elemental had really terrible marketing, but the fact that people had gotten used to Pixar movies coming out straight to Disney Plus was one big reason as to why both of these movies underperformed. And then we cut to the present day with Inside Out 2, the movie that truly ended Pixar's streak of original movies. It was fun while it lasted. And as I've brought up before, this movie is doing amazing at the box office. Again, it has become the highest grossing movie of 2024, and it isn't even 2 weeks old yet. The reason for this is simple. Inside Out 2 is a sequel. People are going to go and watch Inside Out 2 because it's something that they know. It's something that they're familiar with. It's almost the complete opposite of the first Inside Out, which was successful in part because it was an original idea released during a time when Pixar was just putting out sequels non-stop. A lot of people are happy that Pixar finally has another successful movie on their hands after a streak of box office flops and direct-to-Disney Plus movies. But I think this is something that we should be just a little bit concerned about. I apologize if this comes off as a glass half empty kind of video, but this is just stuff that needs to be said. I feel like we should be more concerned about the fact that Pixar's first successful movie since a sequel is another sequel. The 6 original movies that they put out in between the sequels, they were either box office flops or direct-to-Disney Plus movies. To be fair though, 4 of these movies were affected by the pandemic. I have to acknowledge that. And the latter 2 movies were simply nothing more than victims to the aftermath. By the time these 2 movies came out, nobody wanted to go back to how things were pre-pandemic. But then there's also the fact that these are original movies, and considering the fact that Pixar had been solely relying on sequels non-stop in the 2010s, I guess it might have warped the way that people looked at Pixar movies. People no longer wanted to see a new original story told from Pixar. They just wanted to see the same thing over and over and over again. They didn't want to see a new unique storyline. No, they just wanted to see Toy Story and Cars over again. Nothing new, nothing nothing fresh, nothing at all. It's honestly kind of a miracle that the first Inside Out and Coco were successful when they came out, honestly. And so then you have a sequel, which naturally ends up raking in a lot of money due to brand recognition. People know Inside Out. People are familiar with Inside Out. And so naturally, a sequel to it ends up doing successfully based on that. Elemental is a new original idea, so nobody's gonna go and watch it, but Inside Out is something that people are familiar with, so naturally people would go and see Inside Out too, and it ends up making a lot of money at the box office. The reason this concerns me is the fact that we could end up being in another age where Pixar starts relying on their sequels more and more. Basically a repeat of the 2010s. The completely original, unique quality that they had in their 2000s output, that's almost entirely gone now. Now they're gonna start relying on sequels again. I mean, for f***'s sake, we're already getting Toy Story 5 in 2026, a movie that I'm pretty sure nobody in the world wanted. Like, I'm sure there were at least, like, I don't know, 4 people that wanted Toy Story 4 to happen, but I guarantee you there are exactly 0 people that wanted Toy Story 5, and yet it's happening anyways. And then there's also the fact that we are allegedly getting both Finding Nemo 3 and The Incredibles 3. Emphasis on allegedly. These are just rumors. Nothing is set in stone yet. And then for both of these, it's like, I mean, I guess I'm not necessarily against the idea of a Finding Nemo 3, but like, I don't know, Finding Nemo doesn't really feel like the kind of movie that should have a trilogy, if that makes sense. And I would be excited for Incredibles 3 if it weren't for how underwhelming Incredibles 2 turned out. Unless by some miracle this ends up being a Cars situation where Incredibles 3 actually feels like a true sequel to Incredibles 1 and it completely disregards Incredibles 2. But I don't think that's going to happen, unfortunately. I know that Pixar's next movie after this is Elio, which is an original movie. This was a movie that was supposed to come out in early 2024, but it has been delayed to early 2025. Don't act surprised if this movie ends up flopping at the box office. Regardless of if it ends up being good or bad, even if by some chance it ends up being a modern Pixar classic, if it ends up being a flop, just know that it was because it's an original movie. It's a new idea from Pixar. It's not a sequel or anything like that. The success of this movie has made me greatly concerned for the quality of Pixar's future output. And it's just really disappointing to me, the idea that like Pixar is going to start relying on sequels again. That unique, you know, special feel is just gone now. It used to feel like an event going to see a Pixar movie in theaters, you know? Like, it used to feel special. It used to feel like an iconic moment to see what new story Pixar has cooked up this time. I always think about their 3-film run in the late 2000s, Ratatouille, WALL-E, and Up. 3 completely original movies that are all perfect. None of them have sequels. None of them should ever have sequels. And to be honest, none of them have the potential to get sequels, because how the hell could a Ratatouille sequel work, honestly? And on the one hand, it bothers me that we are never going to get that sort of thing again, that 3-film run ever again. On the other hand though, thinking about it more, what other sequels could Pixar make, hypothetically? As I brought up before, we're getting Toy Story 5 in 2026, and allegedly we're getting Finding Nemo 3 and The Incredibles 3. But that's it. Those are the only ones that we know of, and only one of them is confirmed. The other 2 are just speculation. I guess Cars 4 could happen, but I don't know. I haven't seen Cars 3 in years, but I remember it feeling like a finale. In addition to feeling like a true sequel to Cars, like it disregards everything about Cars 2, it also felt like a proper finale to the Cars series. I mean, obviously, they could still keep making spin-off stuff, you know, cartoons and shorts and whatever, they could still do that, but when it comes to, like, proper mainline movies, I think it's just, it ends with Cars 3, and that's it. And then you look at a lot of their other movies that haven't gotten sequels yet, you know? A Bug's Life, I don't think has any chance of ever getting a sequel. It's not one of Pixar's more fondly remembered movies. It's not considered a bad movie or anything like that, but it's just a movie that kind of exists, and that's it, you know? It's just that movie that came out in between Toy Story and Toy Story 2. If we were to get a sequel to A Bug's Life, we would have gotten it a long time ago. As it stands, I find it highly unlikely that we will get a sequel to A Bug's Life. Monsters Inc., I think they said something recently that, like, they don't have any ideas for a Monsters Inc. sequel. I don't know. Fun fact, at some point in the 2000s, they were going to make a Monsters Inc. 2, but it ultimately ended up not happening. It's like a really long story. Circle 7 Animation, which was like this really short-lived division at Disney. I'm not sure. This was before Disney bought Pixar. It's like a long thing, but like we were gonna get Monsters Inc. 2 alongside early versions of Toy Story 3 and Finding Nemo 2, and then none of these movies ended up happening, and then Disney bought Pixar and the rest is history. I don't know. But at the same time though, they have that Monsters at Work cartoon, so you know what, maybe that's all that Monsters Inc. needs. You have the main movie, you have a prequel, and then you have a spin-off cartoon. That's pretty much it. Maybe it's okay to not have a proper, you know, theatrical film sequel to Monsters Inc. Maybe that's okay. This TV show spin-off is good enough for us. The aforementioned 3-film streak, I just cannot see getting sequels at all. Maybe very vaguely they could somehow find a way to make a Ratatouille sequel, but with WALL-E and Up, it's like there's no chance. Like, how the f would a WALL-E 2 work, honestly? Up kind of got a sequel. Like, he had that little short film that was attached to Elemental. I guess you could consider that a sequel, I don't know. It felt more like an epilogue to Up rather than a sequel, and it was more just an unintentional tribute to Carl's voice actor who passed away a few years before the short came out. But you know what? Again, it works, you know, just a little short film for Up, and that's it. Obviously, Up is not going to get a sequel. There's no way for it to work. Brave, much like A Bug's Life, isn't really that popular. It's not going to get a sequel at all. Again, if it were to get a sequel, we would have gotten it a long time ago. Not a lot of people really remember Brave. It's just a movie that's kind of there and that's it, so I don't see it getting a sequel at all. The Good Dinosaur is for sure not going to get a sequel for a multitude of reasons. The mediocre quality of the first Good Dinosaur, the fact that it flopped at the box office, and the development hell that it went through, I think cement the fact that we are not going to get a Good Dinosaur 2. Coco is a movie that, again, I think it works better as a standalone one-time film. Then again though, I did say the same thing for Inside Out, and look where we are now. So I wouldn't be surprised if somehow, just somehow, they found a way to make a Coco 2. I don't know. I honestly kind of hope they leave Coco alone, because Coco was a beautiful movie, and I don't want it to get a sequel that will very likely end up being inferior to the first movie. Especially if it ends up being another Inside Out situation where the second movie is just the same thing as the first movie, except not as good. And then finally, you have the 6 original film streak of Onward up to Elemental. None of these movies, I think, are going to get sequels at all. It's not just the fact that they performed poorly or anything like that, it's just I don't see them at all. Stuff like Luca and Turning Red, Elemental, you know, these are just, you know, standalone movies, one-time movies. I don't see them getting sequels at all. So maybe the future of Pixar isn't as bleak as I initially made it out to be, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be cautious about it either. After all, you had that recent interview or whatever where Pixar said they didn't want to keep making more of these movies based on people's personal lives, like Luca and Turning Red, and instead they wanted to make movies that had more mass appeal, which Inside Out 2 clearly had. And I'm not gonna lie, even though I don't think Luca or Turning Red are great movies, I don't think they're one of Pixar's stronger movies. I can at least respect them for being original movies. If anything, all this talk about Inside Out 2 being successful and Pixar potentially focusing on sequels again, it's made me reevaluate Turning Red just a little bit. I never thought Turning Red was a bad bad movie or anything like that, but it's just, I didn't think it was Pixar, you know? If any other animation studio made it, I wouldn't think much of it. If it was from like DreamWorks or Sony or Illumination or whatever, it was just like, I wouldn't think much of it at all. But the fact that this is from the same studio that gave us Ratatouille, it was just really weird to me, you know? I refuse to believe that Turning Red was from the same studio that gave us WALL-E. I also thought that the movie had a very annoying, cringeworthy tone to it, which I get that's intentional, but like, that doesn't automatically make it good or better. I understood that the movie was not for me necessarily, but still, I didn't think it was a very good, very enjoyable movie. But now in retrospect, I can respect this movie for trying to do something different when compared to what other Pixar movies have done before. I can respect this movie for taking that risk, and even if I don't love this movie, I can at least, you know, acknowledge, hey, it tried to do something different. It bothers me now that Pixar thinks making sequels to their already existing movies counts as mass appeal. I mean, it kind of does, but like, back in the 2000s, they were making new original ideas. They were experimenting with new stories, and these movies, they still had mass appeal despite that. WALL-E is one of the most experimental animated movies I've ever seen. Like, there is nothing else like it. It's just this one-of-a-kind, unique animated movie. There is nothing else like it in Pixar's filmography, but it still has a lot of mass appeal despite that. Back then, Pixar was making movies that were just new and unique, completely different from all the other animation studios at the time, but they also had mass appeal despite that. And it bothers me that we're not going to see anything like that again. That 3-film streak that they had in the late 2000s, I think that was their peak actually. And even though I love the first Cars, I wish it didn't come out in between The Incredibles and Ratatouille, because then we would have gotten an even better 4-film streak, you know? The main thing to take away from this video is, who knows what Pixar will do in the future? Who knows if the success of this movie will give Pixar the wrong idea that we want more sequels and we don't want any more original movies, or if they'll still keep making original movies besides Toy Story 5 and allegedly Finding Nemo 3 and Incredibles 3, because really there aren't really that many Pixar movies that can get sequels, unless somehow by some f***ing chance they find a way to make Up 2. I don't know. But anyways, as I saw Inside Out 2 becoming more and more successful at the box office, I just knew I had to make this video. And considering the fact that shortly before I started recording this video, I saw that Inside Out 2 has officially become the highest grossing film of 2024, I immediately knew that, yeah, this video had to be made for sure. Again, this has nothing to do with the quality of Inside Out 2 itself. It has nothing to do with what I personally think about it. Even if I thought that this was a masterpiece movie, I still would feel a bit concerned for Pixar's future. I can't even say I'm surprised that this movie is doing successfully at the box office. After all, this is a sequel to one of the most beloved Pixar movies that come out of the 2010s. Of course, it goes without saying that the box office performance of a movie does not dictate the quality of the movie itself. Sometimes there are movies that are massively successful at the box office, but they're not very good, and sometimes there are movies that do terrible at the box office even though they're amazing movies. Furiosa is one of the best movies of 2024 and it's doing terrible at the box office, just to give a recent example. That's not me saying Inside Out 2 is a terrible movie or anything like that, but it's just a reminder that just because a movie is successful at the box office doesn't automatically mean it's a great movie. Please remember that. With the success of this movie, only time will tell how the future of Pixar will end up being. Whether they end up focusing on original movies still, or they start relying on sequels again, we don't know yet. Only time will tell. Although I will say, if Elio ends up becoming a box office flop when it comes out next year, that's when we can start to panic. That's when the red flags will start to grow. I'm just gonna put that out there. Anyways, that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see you all next time. Adios.